Luckily for the British Expeditionary Force, the Luftwaffe failed to put Dunkirk harbour out of action. It was from the harbour, rather than the beaches, that the great majority of troops were embarked. Late on the 30th, the Germans finally realized the scale of Operation Dynamo. It was decided that an all-out effort must be made to break through the British Expeditionary Force defences. On May the 31st, the Allies were forced to fall back to the line of defences along the Franco-Belgian frontier. German pressure on the perimeter continued throughout the next day, and there were further massive assaults from the Luftwaffe. Yet again, the Allied rearguard was forced back, though they managed to prevent a German breakthrough. On June the 2nd, daylight evacuation had to be suspended because of the ferocity of Luftwaffe attacks. But by then, Operation Dynamo was nearly finished. That night, the last British troops were brought safely away. On June the 3rd, the Germans drove the French rearguard, numbering 30,000, into the outskirts of Dunkirk itself. That night, Ramsay's ships attempted to evacuate this last contingent. Their task was complicated by the sudden arrival of thousands more unarmed French troops. These had quit fighting earlier in the week and had since hidden in cellars, empty houses, and anywhere else they could around the port. Now, news of the Navy's last departure brought them streaming onto the beaches, desperate to get on board one of the final ships. In spite of all the ensuing confusion, 26,000 French troops were successfully evacuated. However, as the last ship sailed out of Dunkirk, nearly 40,000 men had to be left behind. This caused immense bitterness amongst the French, many of whom accused their chief ally of abandoning them. Nonetheless, Operation Dynamo had been an astounding success. A total of 338,000 Allied troops had been brought safely to England. Even though Britain had suffered a catastrophic defeat, Dunkirk took on an immediate mythic resonance for the British people. It symbolized their brave and resourceful resistance to German might. To that extent, Dunkirk had a profound inspirational effect, which helped Britain to continue fighting even when, as now, her position seemed hopeless. For while Britain had succeeded in rescuing her army from the brink of destruction, that army was currently in no condition to fight another campaign. Nearly all its heavy weaponry, transport and material had been abandoned, including 2,500 guns, 64,000 vehicles, and well over 500,000 tons of stores and equipment. With the cream of the Allied armies routed in Belgium, it could only be a matter of time before Germany finished off Wegen's remaining forces. In less than 4 weeks of fighting, the French had already lost 30 divisions and most of their armor. Their allies had also been defeated. As for the Germans, most of their infantry had scarcely been engaged yet, and the panzer divisions were now rested and refitted. They had already established large and solid bridgeheads at both Amiens and Peronne. All that faced them was another hastily constructed French line. Wegen's forces were deployed along the line of the Somme and Aisne rivers. 49 French divisions manned this front's 225 miles, with 17 more left in the Maginot Line. There were also 4 British divisions. Two of these had been isolated from Gort's main force and thus missed the Dunkirk evacuation, while the other two were newly arrived from England. The French forces included 6 much depleted mechanized and armoured divisions, and the British also had 1 weakened armoured division. The French were opposed by 130 German infantry divisions, including the fresh 2nd and 9th Armies. The panzers were regrouped into 5 armoured corps, each containing 2 panzer divisions and 1 of motorized infantry. 3 of these corps were given to Army Group B in the west, one being commanded by Rommel and the other 2 by Kleist. The 2 remaining panzer corps, under Guderian, went to Army Group A in the east. To bolster his weak forces, Weygand ordered the construction of a checkerboard of closed operational bases called hedgehogs. These were installed in woods and villages and packed with artillery used in an anti-tank role. Even if outflanked, the hedgehogs were designed to be able to continue resisting. The German offensive opened in the west on June the 5th. The French put up a determined resistance, and the Germans had difficulty in subduing the hedgehogs. At last, on the 7th, Rommel's panzers broke through towards Rouen. French resistance in this sector promptly collapsed. Rommel had dealt with the hedgehogs by bypassing them completely and leaving them for the infantry to mop up. Army Group A's offensive began on June the 9th and also ran into stiff resistance. But that night, Guderian got his tanks across the Aisne. The next day, he widened his bridgehead, and with the remaining panzer divisions following through, the French defense gave way. Weygand's armies began to disintegrate on all fronts, and on June the 10th, Reynaud and his government left Paris. 4 days later, the Germans entered the city. On June the 16th, Reynaud resigned and a new cabinet was formed, headed by Marshal Philippe Pétain. 84 years old, Pétain had been one of the heroes of France's victory in World War I. In the present crisis, however, Pétain could see no point in prolonging the struggle. A request for an armistice was transmitted to Hitler. The following day, June the 17th, Pétain made a national broadcast instructing the French to stop fighting. By June the 19th, Rommel occupied Cherbourg, which marked the end of his campaign. In 6 weeks, his 7th Panzer, nicknamed the Phantom Division for its apparent ability to appear out of nowhere, had captured nearly 100,000 prisoners, as well as hundreds of guns and armored vehicles. His own casualties came to just over 2,500, of which fewer than 700 were killed. Only 42 of his tanks had been destroyed. In the east, Guderian's remorseless panzer drive quickly cut off all the French troops in the Maginot Line before pushing on to the Swiss border. To his right, Kleist's panzer corps crossed the Loire and penetrated as far as Lyon. On June the 20th, Hitler delivered his terms to the French envoys. Hitler's main objective was to cut France off from Britain. The northern part of France would be occupied by Germany and used as a base for continuing the war with Britain. The remainder would be governed from Vichy by a regime headed by Pétain. The French could keep their fleet, and their colonies.